check. Here we go. Here we are once again. Happy July, everybody. This is the July edition of the Breath Club, the live Breath Club. This is where I'm going to be answering some of the questions from some of our Patreon club. If you've not already joined the Patreon club, I mean, come on. What's stopping you? It's only $5 a month, and that gets you into the very first tier. And what that gets you is access to my complete catalog of breathwork. So all of my polished breathwork sessions that I have accumulated over the years. There's like 100 of them, I think, at this point. That also includes all the live sessions we've had. One of the cool things about the Breath Club is that it's offered me an opportunity to experiment. Yes, experiment with all the things that I've been learning over the years. And many of you know that over the past few years, I've developed my own philosophy of breath work, and that is the language of breath. It is completely different from everything else that's out there, very unique. And you can get access to that. My book is coming out in October, which will explain all of that philosophy of breath work and self-awareness. That's the language of breath. So that's coming out in October. But if you have, if you want to dive into it, we are taking early applications for the Language of Breath Breathworker School. This will be our third class that's starting next year, the 2024 class. I just got back. I really haven't even been able to adapt back to Eastern time zone. I just got back from the mountains, and we were graduating the 2023 class of the Language of Breath Breathworker School. So the Language of Breath Breathworker School, we do a hybrid option. So for April, May, and June, so about 3.5 months, you do weekly and sometimes twice a week classes with me via Zoom. You have reading, you have homework, you have all kinds of stuff. By the time you get to the practical, so the in-person practical, by the time you get there, you're feeling pretty comfortable. But I want to make sure that I send out the best breath workers in the entire world. Language of Breath is something that's different from every other style of breath work out there. It uses a lot of the same techniques, but in a very unique way. And so we go out and we do an awesome retreat. We get hands-on experience, and I send people home. And so I just got back from the 2023 class. We have some amazing breath workers out there. You're going to be seeing more of them if you watch on this channel and on Instagram. So a lot of good things coming this month. We are doing the Q&A. So I'm going to get to some of your questions here in just a minute. This is questions from the $20 tier or higher if you are in my Patreon club. And I want to thank everybody for being in those tiers. And of course, hey, if you're not in the $20 tier or higher, if you're in a $5 tier, I still really appreciate you. It's you that you're able to help me to live this life. And there are a lot of things that I do. There are a lot of things I do that I can't really take a profit from. For instance, my work in the drug rehab clinics and my work with first responders. Yes, I do charge for those, but I don't charge so much because I want to make sure that those budgets can afford the things that they need so much. We're breaking into a lot of new areas. A lot of people who have never had breath training are really reluctant. And so a lot of these people that are in charge of the budgets, they're not willing to allot a whole lot of budget to see something that they're not really convinced of yet. So I want to thank everybody for being in the Patreon club. Your support is helping breathwork make it to places where it's really needed. Now, if you're saying, hey, breathwork, that just means sitting there for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour or whatever, and doing all sorts of techniques or breathing hard and all these things. That's like this much of breathwork. Yes, we're about to have a breathwork party in the Patreon club. So at the next hour, so it's about 2:05 here in the East Coast, or I'm in the Midwest, but we're Eastern time. It's about 2:05 at 3:00 today. So just in a little bit less than an hour, we will be doing the Patreon Club monthly breath party. So if you're already in the Breathwork Club, if you're in the Breath Club, awesome. Don't miss out. In just a little bit of time, we're going to get together, and it's kind of a special one because I'm going to let you hear some of the new Language of Breath proprietary music. All of the breath workers that certify in Language of Breath get a catalog of music to take with them, specially designed for leading breathwork sessions. And I'm excited to share that with the tribe today. So that's going to be at the next hour. We're going to cover, before we get to that next hour, we're going to cover some of the questions I've been getting. And I would love to hear from you. So I don't get to do these as often as I like. My goal, so I've got goals, man. I got goals. My goal is that next semester. That's my English professor coming back again. My goal is that starting next month, I'll be able to do more of these YouTube lives, and maybe, of course, have the one for the Patreon Club, special for Patreon Club members, and then have some other ones to answer your questions. There's a lot of things going on. The world is full of all kinds of crazy news. I don't know if you've heard about the aliens. so hey, the thing is, when I was a kid, and when I was especially in high school, people would complain that the world was too stable, and they had the Matrix come out. It was like there's no way the world is so stable. It's got to be fake. It's got to be some kind of thing. And now here we are, and there's all kinds of crazy things happening all the time. And so it's exactly, Ben. And so it's one of those things where one of the things we have to understand is that things in life are always going to change. We're always going to have things that scare us, and we have a part of ourselves. And actually, one of our questions today, I'm going to explain, a part of ourselves is always trying to help us to survive and thrive. And we need to be able to speak calm back into that relationship. And that is ultimately one of the greatest parts of breath work. This is ultimately the goal of the Language of Breath, is to form that better relationship within ourselves so we can form a better relationship with the outside world. So we're going to talk about some of that today, because I know some of these questions are here, and we're going to cover those today. And for those of you guys who are wanting to find out more, let's see here. If you want to find out more about this, go ahead and you can find out more using languageofbreathcollective.com. And we are starting to take early applications for the 2024 Breathworker School program. This is the best school that there is. I can say that with absolute confidence. I have amazing faculty, and you're going to be hearing more and more about it. We just got back, so I am still catching up on my sleep. We've had an amazing time. But anyway, today, let's get into some questions. I've got some really excellent questions from the Patreon members. If you are in the $20 or above tier, let me know if you're like, oh, I forgot about this. And so click over here, put something in the chat box, and I'll take a look at your questions. So what I'm going to do is take a look at these questions, and actually had two questions that were similar. I'm going to hit that first. So the first two questions are ultimately about CO2 tolerance. And this is something we've talked about a lot on this channel, and I talk a lot about it with my clients. And ultimately, there are two tests that are the most popular tests when it comes to testing CO2 tolerance. One is the controlled pause, or the BOLT score, which is something that Patrick McKeown has made very famous, using a controlled pause. This is from the Buteyko School of Breathwork. And then there's the one that I use. I don't really use the BOLT score. I don't use the controlled pause so much. Not that I have anything against it. I'll tell you why I don't use it here in just a minute. But the other one is the controlled exhale. And so the controlled exhale is detailed in my book, A Practical Guide to Breathwork. If you want to find out more about that, you can go to jessekummer.com. But just as a quick reference of what that is, so the BOLT score, you're ultimately taking a deep-ish breath, a regular-ish breath, and you're having a controlled pause until you feel the strong, or at least a reasonable urge to breathe. And then with the lengthened exhale text, you'll take a deep breath, you hold until you feel the urge to breathe, you take another deep breath, you hold until you feel the urge to breathe, and then you take one last deep breath and you time your exhale. And so the questions that I've been getting is, which one's the better one, and what do what does CO2 tolerance mean in like everyday life? One of the questions was more focused toward athletes. So I want to thank both of you guys for asking this question. Let's talk about it. So first and foremost, the reason why I use the controlled exhale test is because I believe that it tells me a little bit more about you. It tells me also, I think it's a little harder to mess up. The Bolt score or the controlled exhale or the controlled pause from Buteyko, both of them rely on a subjective urge to breathe. So when you say wait until you feel a reasonable urge to breathe or an urge to breathe or a strong urge to breathe, it's difficult to explain exactly what that's going to feel like. And so it takes some time and practice. Generally, whenever I do a CO2 tolerance test, it's with a client when I'm first meeting that client. I want to find out as much as I can from that client from the get-go. And it's difficult to get a good read across the world. And then they're not right in front of me. Sometimes it's difficult to do that with a controlled pause. So I use the lengthened exhale test. So the lengthened exhale test, it's simply easier not to mess it up. Plus, it also gives me a better idea of your relationship with stress because CO2 is one of the strongest stressors that you can have. It is something that as that CO2 rises with your exhale, there are other things that can come into play that ultimately will make you show me your relationship with that stress and what state of stress you're in currently. Now, can you find those things out with the Bolt score? Yes. But this is just the one I prefer. And I think that sometimes, it just comes down to what one is the easiest one for me to explain. And that's pretty much it. The other thing about CO2 tolerance, when it comes to what does it relate to? How does this work? Some of the biggest things is that whenever you're able to tolerate more CO2, you're able to tolerate more stressors of just any kind. And then also whenever you're able to tolerate more CO2, the nice thing is you're able to oxygenate your tissues a lot more effectively. So these are things that athletes especially are looking into because they are under enormous amount of stress and they want to oxygenate their tissues so they have greater overall capacity for, dunking, killing it on the court, on the field. And so what happens is when we train CO2, we've also found that you can sit there and train your CO2 all you want to, and you can have an incredibly high CO2 tolerance score at a seated or a stationary position. And what we've found is that it doesn't really translate into better performance on the field. What? I always thought that if you trained your CO2, then yeah, it'll translate to higher performance. It does, but you have to. What I have found with my clients is my athletes is that you have to train CO2 while moving. You have to train CO2 while doing athletic sports if you want those enhancements on the field, in the in the gym or whatever. So how you train CO2 makes a big difference. So one of the questions had to do with athletic pursuits. My best advice to you is breathe through your nose and to try to do things that are steady state cardio while finding a breath hunger. So for instance, you're going to find a lot of that in my original book, A Practical Guide to Breathwork. So some step-by-step things that are going to, like for instance, on the treadmill, on a stationary bike, on a row machine, things like that. Those are the things that I recommend because those are steady state and they aren't, like for instance, if you're doing CO2 tolerance training while playing basketball, you may be focusing more on the CO2 tolerance training than the game itself. So I recommend finding steady state to do that in. And when you do that, you're more likely to have those potential gains rather than whenever you are just sitting there and doing controlled pauses or sitting there doing, for instance, like a Buteyko, or in the language of breath, we have an exercise called the CO2 tolerance focused awareness exercise. Yes, I named, so and the other questions are language of breath centric. So yes, for those of you who have taken the language of breath online course, you know that I name techniques very boring names. I do not want to have any guruship. I'm not looking for some kind of a slick marketing thing on these techniques. I want you to understand that everything in the language of breath, none of it, I didn't just somehow come down from the mountain, as a lot of breath workers like to pretend they did. I didn't just come down from the mountain and just somehow, oh, this breathing technique came to me, right? Or I did this, or I came out of water and suddenly I realized if I breathe this way. No, it came from thousands of years of controlled breath work, thousands of years of breath work that people have passed down through the generations. It came from decades of a little bit over 100, over 100 years. Yeah, over 100 years of scientific research in how breathing affects our physiology. And it came from the years of me being a professional breath worker and a breath coach. That's how that worked. It was not some kind of a thing, oh, I just invented it out of nowhere. Everything in the language of breath is based off of research. Everything in the language of breath is based off of my personal experience and the experience of thousands of other people that came before us. So I have a technique in the language of breath called the CO2 focused awareness exercise. And that is something that you're going to find in the course. Currently, the course is being updated, but it's still available. If you go to my website, jessecoomer.com or languageofbreathcollective.com, you can find everything you need to get started on those courses. And then whenever they're updated, you'll get a notification for all of the updates. But anyway, let's get into the next question with language of breath. And ultimately, let's see, bear with me. All right, Mike. Mike asks the question. So in the language of breath, the main goal of the language of breath is to form a better union within yourself. Now, that sounds pretty boilerplate or pretty typical for the breathwork state. You hear that sort of thing all the time, but ultimately, what does that mean? Ultimately, you are a relationship no matter what you think you are. That's what you are. You are not an operator. You are. So oftentimes we think of ourselves as this, like almost like a machine operator. I am a mind and I operate a body, and I listen to my body, and I have to listen to what my body has to say so that I can take care of my body, so I can make my body do other things. And in the language of breath, we say, ultimately, and this is just the reality of it, guys, we have to break this, what's called the Cartesian split that happened with Rene Descartes. And it happened even earlier than that, but that's when it was really codified as like, hey, I'm a mind that controls a body or that listens to the body or whatever. You are one thing, my friend. You are 37.2 trillion cells that all work together. And when we talk about making a better union or a better relationship within ourselves, what we're talking about is not a mind and body thing, because it's all one thing. You are all one thing. What we're talking about is the ways that we experience this life. In this life, we think we're having a singular experience, but it's not really that way. You are an unconscious and a conscious self that works together to create the experience that you have here on planet Earth. And you're really only consciously aware of about maybe 5 or 10% of it. The rest of you, and that's the vast majority of you, is unconscious. You're not consciously aware of it. So that includes autonomic nervous system, that includes subconscious beliefs, that includes patterns that you've picked up, that includes your personality, your sense of humor, your morality, all your values, all those things. You have those on an unconscious level. You also have those things on a conscious level, but oftentimes they're in conflict with each other. And so what we do in the language of breath is that we learn how to communicate between these two aspects of ourselves, and we form a better union between those two things. So Mike has not done the course. So Mike, I would recommend check out the course or check out the book in October. The book is coming out October 24th, 2023. And so that is going to explain this in great detail. This is something that's been, and the nice thing is, like I said, it's thousands of years of breathwork training that have happened over the centuries. It's over 100 years of science on the art of breath work, and then all the experience that I have with my clients and with myself. So that is what the goal is of the language of breath. That is ultimately when we talk about developing a relationship within ourselves. It's kind of vague. It sounds kind of woo woo maybe, but it's very real. Ever since human beings have been human beings, we've been trying to get that relationship in check, and we've searched for all sorts of answers and things like that. And the reality is, once you're aware of it, that's why in the language of breath, we say that awareness is the foundation of all positive change. Once you're aware of what you are, once you know what you are, you can start to work on who you are. And the thing is, there's so many voices in this space that look at it, and it's very difficult not to look at it through the old lens of separation. I am a singular mind and I have a body. And the reality is, your lived experience is a combination of unconscious and conscious processes that create everything that you are. And everything you are works together. So we tend to like to separate parts of ourselves. And in reality, if you want to have a better inner relationship, you have to see yourself as a full thing that is working within itself. And the better relationship you have within yourself, the better relationship you're going to have outside with the outside world. So often we see ourselves as a master and a slave, mind over body, master-slave relationship. And it's no wonder if we see ourselves like that, no wonder we treat each other terribly. That's how we see ourselves. And so that's how that will be reflected in the outside world. The reality is you are a relationship. And if you treat yourself in a positive way, if you learn how to listen to the unconscious self, if you're not just trying to order, if you're trying to work together, you're going to have a better overall lived experience, and your relationships with the outside world are going to improve as well. So, Mike, I know that I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I hope that answers your question, and I appreciate your question. How are we doing, guys? Where are you guys watching from? It's good to see you. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. I just got back from the Convergence. If you guys saw me, I was promoting the Convergence for quite some time. I know a lot of you guys reached out and you just couldn't come this year. We're going to try to do it again next year. This is our third year to do the Convergence. And I always love going out to North Carolina, and it's out in nature, and we drink the most beautiful, clear, crystal clear water. Mandala Springs is called that because there's like 21 natural springs, artisan springs. The water there is just so perfect. So we were out there, and I was out there for about 3 days for the Convergence retreat. And then I flew directly from North Carolina. So I flew from the Appalachian Mountains to the Rocky Mountains into Silverton, Colorado. And I was there for a full week. And I was teaching the graduating class of the language of breath. And I want to congratulate the graduating class of the language of breath. They killed it. They were rock stars. They went out there, and there was so much enthusiasm, so much eagerness to learn, and so much camaraderie. So if you are looking to enter into the 2024 class, we haven't really even started the campaign or whatever to accept students, and we're already, I'd say, a quarter of the way full. So I literally got back Monday, graduating the last class. So normally we don't start opening up the class. I mean, we've had early applications open for a little while, but we normally don't even tell people, hey, it's open to apply until September. So we already have quite a few people signed up for that. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go to languageofbreathcollective.com, or you can email me. If you go to jessecoomer.com, you can email me and ask me more about it, and I'll send you all the information. But that is to learn how to do language of breath, philosophy of breath work. So it's everything. It's not just a technique that you master a single technique and you do that once a day and fantastic. It's not just 2 techniques. It's not just 3 techniques. It is a complete philosophy of breath work and self-awareness that is unlike anything else out there. So if you are in the breath club, we're going to have a breathwork session at the top of the next hour. So it's almost 2:30 now. So about 3 o'clock Eastern, we're going to have a breathwork session. We're going to be using proprietary language of breath music, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into the language of breath. We're going to use the language of breath philosophy in this session. So in the Patreon club, there's all kinds of breath work, right? So I guide you through all kinds of breath work. And like I've said before, a lot of times it's me experimenting with different things. This is something I've been working with. This is something I've been reading about. I've been noticing my clients having a positive reaction when they do this. And the breath club, you guys get to experiment with me. This month, however, I sent you 2 sessions that utilize the language of breath philosophy in a deeper way than much of the past. And so, of course, I've gotten all kinds of positive feedback from it. When we use the fullness of the language of breath philosophy, breath work that you used to be like, how can this get any better? There's just no comparison. So we're going to be doing that at the top of the next hour. And that is at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time or 1 o'clock. Let's see, or I guess that's noon Pacific Standard Time. So guys, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank all of those of you guys who are in the Patreon club. And if you didn't get a chance to ask me a question this time, just feel free to DM me and I'd be happy to answer your question. Actually, there's one more. I think Yushetta had one more. Bear with me just a second. Let's see here. And we will get to that question. Okay. So this one is this is more unique. Let's see here. Okay, so this one has to do with CO2, but it's basically Yushetta is doing mantras and she's doing chanting and she's looking for the best way. So she says, what's the best way to exhale slowly and be able to chant longer? Any advice on this? Thanks in advance. She says basically she's looking to extend these chants. I don't know how I missed that. Yushetta, I'm like, that was the unconscious me saying, there's one more, Jesse. So one of the things I said to her was ultimately increasing CO2 tolerance. One of the ways to do that is, especially when you're singing, is lengthening by humming. Humming is one of the best ways to work on lengthening the exhale because it's more natural, it's pleasurable, and especially if you're doing chanting, it's conducive to that kind of activity. Now, when you're chanting, when you're doing things like that, a lot of times you're using a lot of words, and that can make it so that you're exhaling a little faster. But whenever you practice lengthening the exhale using a humming sound, or even sometimes some people use whistling or singing or any of those things, ultimately what's happening is you've got 2 things working. You have to push a certain amount of breath out at a certain pace in order to keep a certain tone. So what that does is it forces you to keep that certain pace. Now, whenever you improve your CO2 tolerance, you should be able to lengthen that. However, what we find is that functional breathing, I mean, it's as simple as functional breathing, is what allows us to get more air in, which allows us to get more air out. So I know, Yushetta, you've told me that you've taken the Language of Breath online course. Make sure to review the week where we talk about functional breathing. The more functional your breath, the more efficient you are at inhaling. That's going to give you more air. And then as you practice your CO2 tolerance, you'll be able to use that air more effectively. That combination is most likely the best combination to giving you that lengthen exhale, those abilities to lengthen those chants, those mantras that you're looking to do. Now, one of the reasons why that is because when we use our lungs, we are working with the law of gases. And so one of the things you can do and this is ultimately going to improve your overall lung capacity, is use the straw techniques. So this is something that I have in my first book, A Practical Guide to Breathwork. So if you haven't checked that out, there's a lot of instructions on how to do that. But the reverse straw technique is ultimately when you combine that with functional breathing, you strengthen those inspiratory muscles and enhance your ability to take a deep and functional breath. So this can be something as simple as this, right? So you purse your lips, you exhale completely, and you inhale with that resistance. So it'll look like this. And you really focus on expanding your rib cage, expanding down into the abdomen, expand, expand, expand. You're wanting to avoid using the chest until everything's expanded down bottom. The more you do that, the stronger your inspiratory muscles are going to be. And the deeper the breaths, the easier it's going to be to take those breaths, especially whenever you're trying to do those mantras. You want to make sure that when you do need to take a breath, you do it real fast and effectively so that you can continue on with your singing and your chanting. So, Yusheta, thank you so much for that question. And I hopefully you watched to the end so you got the answer. So, guys, I want to thank everybody for being here. If you have not joined the Breath Club, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're crazy. So I want to invite you to join the Breath Club. If you go to my landing page, there is a little Patreon P there. You click on that. That goes to the Breath Club. $5 gets you in, and $5 just for a guided breath session is a pretty good price. But hey, guess what? That also gets you in for the full month. And that gives you access to the entire catalog of my pre-recorded breath sessions, all kinds of different sessions, different kinds of music, everything that you need to get into a breathwork pattern. And beyond that, you can also get some awesome discounts, early access, and other perks if you go into the higher tiers. So I want to thank everybody for being here. And hopefully I will see you at the breath party coming up in, looks like right about 30 minutes. All right, guys, thanks so much. I'll see you next month.